Hello friends, this is Christopher Davis-Shannon, and today I would like to talk to you about the gospel of the major scale. Now, if you've been playing music for any period of time at all, you're probably familiar with the major scale, and even if you don't know it by name, it's something that is very likely already stuck in your ear. If you have ever taken music lessons before on any instrument, the C major scale is probably the first thing that you ever learned. But one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, why should we learn this? And how does it really benefit our playing? And it really is a few different aspects that it benefits. First off, it helps us have facility on the instrument. What we're going to go through in this video is we're going to teach the basic C major scale as is generally played, and we're going to go over 3 different variations of the major scale to help you really unlock the different positions on your fingerboard and figure out where all the notes are positioned on here. That's one of the joys of fretted instruments, is we have multiple places that we can play each and every note. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about later in this video is the actual construction of the major scale. Understanding how this goes together, where it comes from, and how it can really inform the basics of music theory is very important in understanding why we should bother taking the time to learn this scale. Now, the great thing is once we understand the basic music theory behind this, it carries over to all the other major scales. We only really have to learn this theory on the C major scale itself, and then we can just transpose it to other keys as we go along. So let's hop right in. So let's talk about just the basics of a scale. So our scale is going to be playing from the note C to the note C, an octave above, with no sharps or flats. So we're going to play all of our letter names, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, in order. And on uke, we're going to start that on our open C string, and we're going to walk that up to the 3rd fret of our A string. You can hear those are an octave apart, so the same note, but one is higher than the other. So we're going to do this by walking up. So it'll be an open C, and then we'll have the D, which will be on the 2nd fret of our C string. Then we have an open E string. Our F will be on the 1st fret of our E string. And then our G will be either on the 3rd fret of our E string, or we can also play that on our open G. Those are the same exact notes. And then we have an open A. And then we have a B on the 2nd fret of our A string. And then the C that we resolve to on the 3rd fret of our A string. Now let's try that one together nice and slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you practice that basic C major scale and get used to it, then we want to talk about really understanding the major scale and how it is constructed. Now, that's kind of hard on a fretted instrument. If we think of something like a piano, it's laid out linearly in front of us, and we can really visualize the notes and the space between the notes, what we call intervals. But on a fretted instrument, it's a little bit harder because we're going across strings. So what we can do to better help conceptualize this is do a C major scale up one string. And the space between the frets is going to show us those intervals, or the space between the notes, and that's going to inform how the scale is constructed and how it gets its unique sound. So the way we'll do this is we will play a C major scale, all of the same notes that we just played, but only on our C string, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So we'll start again on our open C, and we're going to use our 1st finger on the 2nd fret for the same D, and then on the 4th fret will be our E. You can check that against your open E string. It's the same exact note. The F is now going to be on the 5th fret. The G, we will shift with our 1st finger to grab that on the 7th fret. And then we have an A on the 9th fret. A B on the 10th fret. And then our C, our octave, is on the 12th fret. So let's just try that single string major scale together, and then we'll talk about how these notes react with each other. 1, 2, 3, 4. So on a fretted instrument, every fret represents one half step. So if you think to a piano, if we played a C major scale, we would only play the white keys of that scale. But on a piano, there are black keys in between. Those are our half steps. So likewise, each of our frets is one half step. So the intervals that we are going to play for a major scale, we have our open C, and then we're going up 2 half steps, right? 2 frets to the 2nd fret. That is what we call a whole step, which is 2 half steps, or 2 frets in this case. And then we go from D to E, we know is on the 4th fret. That's another 2 frets. So we have 2 whole steps together. But then we have this F on the 5th fret. That is only a half step away. So we have whole, half. And then as we shift up to the G on our 7th fret, that gives us another whole step, right? 2 frets apart. Likewise, to get up to the A, another whole step. Then we have another whole step to the B. And then we have another half step at the very end from B to C. And if you look at a piano keyboard, you'll see that your white keys, when you have between an E and an F and a B and a C, there is no black key there. So we automatically have a half step between them. And we'll get to in a little bit why understanding these intervals is important and how we can build around them. But before we get there, I want to talk about 2 other options that we can use to play the C major scale, the same exact notes on this instrument. As I mentioned in the beginning, one of the fun things about fretted instruments is that we're able to play multiple notes on different points at the instrument. So we can go up and play notes as opposed to just going across, much like we just did with that single string major scale. So as we do this, we're going to do this in what's called Campanella style, which means Italian for little bells. And what we're going to do, the goal is to not play 2 consecutive notes on the same string. And that's going to force us to use different fingerings and different positions to play the same exact notes. Now in the beginning, the C and the D that we play, these are the only 2 places on the instrument that we can play this. The open C string and then the 2nd fret. We can't do that anywhere else. And we know we have an open E string, so we'll use that in our Campanella scale as well. But then we want to avoid playing another note on the E string right away. So we're going to shift up to the 5th fret, that same F that we use in our single string major scale, to play our F. So it'll be open, 2, open E, and then we'll shift up, we have that F. Now our G and our A, we have our open strings, right? Open G, open A. And then instead of playing the B up here, because we just played the A string, right? So let's look at where else we can play that. Let's play it on the 4th fret of our G string. Same note, right? Same note as on the 2nd fret of our A string. So we remember that our 2nd finger is already on the 5th fret on that F on the C string. So our 1st finger can just grab this, and then we're resolved to a C, but we're not going to play it on our A string. Let's find another place to play that note. Let's see if we can maybe play it on the E string. And that will be on the 8th fret. Same note. Same note. And there's our octave C. So our first Campanella scale will sound like this. All right, now let's try that one together and then we'll talk about the second one in a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now for our second Campanella scale, let's mix it up and find a different way that we can play this scale. Again, all the same exact notes, but in different positions on the fingerboard. And this is forcing our brain to think in a different manner than we are if we're just playing straight across. So as we mentioned before, the first few notes in the scale, we don't really have many options. C and D, and then we'll have our open E, and then we'll still play that F on the 5th fret, but that's where we'll start to change things. When we get to the F on the 5th fret of our C string, we're going to play that with our pinky this time instead of shifting. The reason we're going to do that is instead of using the open G string, let's use the 3rd fret of our E string, same note, right? And then as we do that, we'll lay down a bar across the 2nd fret because we can play our A now on the 2nd fret of our G string, same note as our open, and we're just keeping this pinky right here. And then our B, instead of playing it on the 4th fret of our G string as we did before, let's play it on the 2nd fret of our A string where we normally would. And then we'll play the C in a location we haven't played it yet. We'll get it on the 5th fret of our G string. So this second Campanella scale is going to sound and look like this. Let's try that one together. 2, 3, 4. So now that we have a few different ways to play the C major scale, let's talk about why we should play the C major scale, because that's kind of important, isn't it? We don't just want busy work. So when we have those Campanella scales, they're wonderful because they open up the fingerboard. They force us to think differently. But if we step back and just think about the C major scale itself, the construction of it that we were talking about over the single string major scale, we can start to see how music theory comes into this. Most of Western music theory is really just based off of the major scale itself. And let's check out how that works. When we start to build chords or groupings of notes, we start with triads or 3-note chords. Now each of these are built off of our major scale. So we can start with our first scale degree, C. So the way we're going to construct a triad, we're going to use the root, the 3rd, and the 5th. And now you should stop and ask yourself, why are we using those 3 notes? We should always ask ourselves why. And the reason that we do this is in the harmonic overtone series, the 5th and the 3rd are the first ones that come up naturally. So you've probably played harmonics on your uke, right? Play your open C, if you play the 12th fret, that's another C right there. But then if we play the 7th fret, that's going to be an octave and a 5th. That's our next even subdivision. And likewise, if we go down to the 4th fret, we'll have an octave and a 3rd after that. So these are the strongest natural tones that come when we play a note on an instrument. So when our ear hears them, it creates that major chord already. Our ear is accustomed to that sound, so it makes sense for us to build our chords in that manner. So if we use the root 3rd and 5th of C, we can just use the scale to count up and figure out what all these notes are. So in C, we'll count out from there. So we have C, D, E is our 3rd, right? So we have a C. E is our open string. There's our 3rd. And then if we count to the 5th, we have F, G, open. And then we can add our octave, the C that we end on the 3rd. And if you look at that, we build that major chord. And that's the root position C major chord that we always use when we are playing uke. This is the first chord you probably ever learned. And all it is a C major triad that we can build and find off of our scale. Now we can go up and we can build throughout the entire scale and see that they build different types of chords. There are 3 types of triads that we're going to talk about today. We have major, which we just played, and then we have minor. So let's talk about minor. You might have heard in the past minor sounds sad, unlike where major sounds happy. So if we go to our second scale degree, we have D, right? C, D. So now we need to find our natural overtones, our root 3rd and 5th off of that D. So as we do it, we have D as our root, right? D, E, F is our 3rd. We know that's on the 1st fret of our E string. If we have D, E, F, G, A is our 5th. We have our open, and we can double that right here. It's a D minor chord that you're very likely familiar with. This is just our root position, D minor, triad. So you can go through this and build all of the naturally occurring chords in the scale, and I've written that on the sheet down below. So what we'll have is we'll have C, D minor, then we have E minor, we have F major, G major, we have A minor, and then we have B diminished, and then right back to C. Now you look at this B diminished chord that we have down there, and this looks like a G7th, except we're not playing the G, is all that it is. And it is exactly that. It is a G7th without a G. So our 7th chord, which is diminished, tends to act the same as our dominant chord. It sounds as if it's coming back to C. So it gives us that natural tension and release. As we just talked about, the fifth scale degree, which we call the dominant, is our first overtone that occurs. So it's one of the strongest relationships to the tonic that we hear. So when we hear this big dominant chord, a G seventh, or if we drop the G on it, a B diminished chord, it begs to come back to the C. So we can start to understand how chords work in relation to each other by just understanding the major scale and putting them together naturally how they fall. And you'll find that most songs that you play in pop music are derived from this major scale. If you have a 2 chord, it will be minor. If you have a 3 chord, it will be minor. If you have a 5 chord, it will be major. And this will go on and on. Now, before we end this video, I just want to take a little bit to talk about the history of the major scale, because it's something that has always made me think a lot, because why do we play this major scale? And this all goes back, again, more than likely, to the overtone series. All of the notes in the major scale go up in our overtone series, but there's actually a little bit more to it. So as we were just talking about the concept of dominants and tonics, right? Our root chord, C in this case, and our dominant chord, G seventh, or just G in this case, those are our two strongest tones relationally. Arnold Schoenberg, who's one of the greatest theorists in 21st century Western music, had a proposal in his theory of harmony about how a major scale, while it is derived from the harmonic series, sounds so great to us because it's really playing with that tonic-dominant relationship. If we take our C major chord, C, E, G, and then we take our dominant chord, which would be G, B, D, we have almost all the notes in our major scale right there. But if we add in what we call our subdominant, our 4 chord, which in this case is an F major chord, F, A, and C, we now have, with just those 3 chords, every single note in the major scale. And the reason that this is important to think about is we have that tonic-dominant relationship. And the subdominant that we were just talking about, the F major chord, we can think about this as being the inverse of our tonic. So where we count up, right? C, D, E, F, G. There's our dominant chord, our 5 chord. We can likewise count backwards, going back a perfect fifth, brings us to our subdominant chord, our 4 chord, right? C, B, and so on, and so on, and so on, back to F. So really, we are working with 2 dominant chords and our tonic chord, and that's all the major scale is playing with the relationship between our tonic and dominant chords. And this is why you find the major scale not just in Western music, but also across different cultures. We have the relationship naturally to the harmonic series, but also to the tonic and dominant relationship. So I know this is a lot to think about with just one major scale, but if you start to understand these concepts in here, this is really the basis of all Western music theory. If you look at many classical pieces, you can really just boil all of them down to a tonic and dominant relationship, the pull and the push of the harmony. That's really what our ear is listening for, is the tension and the release that the tonic and dominant give us. And even when we have crazy chord changes all over the place, most of the time it can be boiled down to just understanding the tonic and dominant and how they always want to resolve to each other.